I'm Pastor Tim Gerbing from Christ Lutheran Church in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Welcome to today's devotion. Today we take a look at the Gospel of John, chapter 19, and we read there verses 10 and 11. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." I've found these words of Jesus to be comforting a number of times in my life. When I was a missionary in Africa, every once in a while I'd find myself in a difficult situation that was beyond my control, where I was forced to deal with authorities who had the power of their government behind them. There were times when the police would take advantage of me because I was a foreigner, and they were trying to put me in a bind where I'd be willing to pay them bribe money so that they would leave me alone. There were times when I'd have to pass through military checkpoints, and there'd be a soldier or an officer, oftentimes drunk, and he would amuse himself by delaying me on my journey and asking me questions that were meant to entrap me and somehow get me into trouble. There was even a time when I was brought to court and had to stand before a judge to account for a false charge that someone had brought against me. Those kind of situations are frightening. But whenever I kept in mind what Jesus said here to Pontius Pilate, who was the most powerful person in the Roman government in Palestine, I would start to feel better. Jesus told Pilate, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." Jesus was amazingly at peace, even though he knew that Pontius Pilate had no personal concern for his well-being, and that Pilate would in fact sentence him to one of the most brutal forms of execution ever invented by man. Jesus knew and believed that his Father would give him the strength and the courage to endure the suffering that he was about to face. He knew that he would not and he could not fail, because it was his Father's will for him to suffer for everyone's sins and overcome it. As bad as the cross was, even worse would be the suffering of the full brunt of his Father's anger for the world's sins, suffering hell itself. But Jesus won that battle. He faced death. He faced and endured God's punishment for all sins. He submitted to death, and then he rose. Death could not hold him. No punishment remained for sin, and victory was his. That victory Jesus won, he won for us. He gives it freely through faith. We too will suffer in life. We will even face death. But there is no burden for a Christian when death comes, because through our faith, Jesus' victory has become ours. Death will not hold us either. We have a resurrection and life that's waiting for us. Thank God Jesus did all of that for us. There's no suffering, no hardship that even approaches the everlasting punishment and suffering that Jesus took away. For Jesus' sake, God is always on and by our side, and he will always bring us safely through all of life's miseries to himself. Amen.